Farming to Glory by Fred D. Townsend Sr., a Jamaican Family Chronicle. In Chapter 3, Cotton Trees and Duppies. The village primary school was 2 miles of rough, winding, brittle track away from home. A steep path from Big House in Queenshill to the slightly better road at Rising, about half mile below, then turning left toward Gilroy Shop and Nana Roberts Bend, and arriving at Cunningham's Gap, where the Dallas Primary School became in full view across the Cane River Valley. To reach the school, we must go another mile by way of Cotton Tree Gully and the Cane River crossing at Stafford Hall Junction before making the final turn toward the school building. Most children are afraid of Cotton Tree Gully, a rapid and precipitous decline thickly forested. The large Tom Gringle cotton tree stood with grace and poise above the road, with its thick and bushy branches spreading hundreds of feet in every direction, providing a permanent but too dark a shade over the valley. Cotton trees have a tendency to make squeaking sounds as their swivel limbs rub against one another. This was perhaps accountable for the frightful ode that old people in the district told us when they were kids. Of course, the dear old souls in those days were very convincing to children, and to some adults too, that ghosts or duppies made their abode at the root of cotton trees. About the year 1949, Ivan was also drafted into the Jamaica Defence Force, thus leaving a terrible void in Queenshill. Both Rudolph and I together could not compensate for Ivan's skills. I tried to explain before that Ivan rarely missed a session in Dallas school and was able to perform his Flamstead errands and other chores without much exhaustion in a single day. He got his father puzzled many times because Teacher Murdoch would unwittingly give Dad favorable reports on Ivan's performance at school on days when, as far as Dad was concerned, Ivan should have been in Gardentown doing business for him. Gardentown was 6 miles away from school. Yet there were no obvious dislocation or breakdown of the services that were to be rendered. Ivan was due to deliver needed articles at Flamstead, and that was done promptly and on time. He was certainly a clever young man, and as the old man must have discovered, Obviously, Rudolph and I were like cheese to chalk, as the saying went, in comparison to Ivan's ability. We tried to maneuver as perhaps others before him had done, but all failed. We fell flat on our faces every time, and and finally gave up. Falling and rising. The crumbling of the Flamsteed influences was further accentuated by Ivan's withdrawal from the scene. The Great House has ceased to be a resort attraction, and Dad severed his services. And Euphema, who was the head cook at the hotel for many years, went home also. The estate became desolate and fell into ruins. The government of the country the government of the country was undergoing changes also. Adult suffrage had been tabled into the old legislative council, and a viable two-party political system came into being and was prepared to contest free elections. Jamaica was becoming of age, and further changes envisaged. In 1962, she won her independence from Great Britain. Among the different social and economic endeavors that the new government embarked upon was a land lease program. Large underutilized properties were acquired, subdivided, and leased on long-term basis to small farmers. The 800-acre Flamsteed property was one of the pioneer projects in the Yalos Valley Land Authority scheme. The land was put into intense farming and afforestation, reserving the Great House site and a few surrounding acres as historical landmark. The fall of the empire was extensive and irreversible. Mom and Dad drew their strength from Psalm 37:19. They shall not be ashamed in the evil times. In the days of famine, they shall be satisfied. Busha Townsend and dear Mama feared nothing, for they knew in whom they had depended and had been convinced that God was able to supply all their needs. My reign with Rodolphe was very short also. I went off to school in Kingston towards the end of the upheaval and changes. In fact, the home duties had become minimal by then. There was no Flamsteed citadel to care about, and not much farming either. The weekly market routine that was Mom's portfolio became very irregular and finally ceased. Rodolphe was the only reliable attendant left at home, keeping very active the communication lines between the children overseas, those in Kingston and Big House. When we finally left home, his younger brother Stanley, who was then living in Stafford Hall, came over to Queenshill. Rodolphe, spending several productive years with my family and other relatives in Kingston, left permanently for London in 1959. By 1962, Independence year, Martin and I were the only two brothers remaining in Jamaica. No, I am wrong. Charles was there also, but his whereabouts unknown. The only sisters remaining with us were Christinella and Leonis. We successfully kept up the correspondence line with those of our kin who had migrated, and ample supports for mom and dad were provided. They lacked nothing. A good soldier. Martin married Mavis Reed in the Garrison Church of Park Camp before I left Queens Hill. Mom and dad attended the wedding. Rudolph and I were custodians at Big House for a whole week, sorry. Martin made rapid strides in the army, obtaining the rank of color sergeant within a few short years. The limit for a non-commissioned officer. Later, he became head of the National Reserve Unit. He was unique in many ways, a self-educated and easily motivated person, and assiduous in his pursuits for excellence. He was kind-hearted and compassionate, but a resolute soldier. On leaving high school, I entered the job market. Before graduation, however, I had planned to enter Michael College, the main teacher training institute for men in Jamaica at the time. There was an alternative also, and that was to enter Kingston Public Hospital Pharmacy School, to which I made a successful application. Another ambition I cherished was to ultimately seek admission to the University College to do a program in social and preventative medicine. None of my notable aspirations materialized in the way I dreamed. I even omitted mentioning that my father had originally decided that I was to have entered Calabar Baptist Seminary to be trained as a Baptist minister. That choice was perhaps due to his great admiration for the British Baptist Commission and others of similar faith, who pioneered the great job of education amongst the poorer and less prominent class of people during the post-emancipation period in rural and suburban Jamaica. Many poor parents of the Baptist faith saw their sons trained as ministers and their daughters as teachers. I can remember prominent educators like Reverend M.E.W. Sawyers and Ivan Francis in the renowned Lincoln College, my own alma mater. There were others, they and others were products of the post-slavery socio-Christian Renaissance. That ends chapter 3. Chapter 4, Going Forward. Chapter 4, Going Forward, Farming to Glory, a Jamaican family chronicle by Fred D. Townsend Sr. Counseling and blessing. After the first year of work, I thought that my elected career as clerical assistant in the Ministry of Communications and Works, PWD, held enough hope and future to take my mind off other pursuits. Within a matter of 2 years, however, I felt the urge for something else, field work or some form of environmental involvement. In 1954, I entered the West Indies School of Public Health and graduated with the London Health Inspector Diploma of the Royal Society of Health. My new career was health worker commenced immediately after graduation. As if I wanted to accomplish more, I became a married man during the same year. These adventures will be better amplified in another edition of this chronicle. Martin was the only obvious big brother to hand who ably supplied me with necessary moral support during my trying days. Many of my adventures succeeded, but some were dire failures. My Christian mother and father prayed hard for all of us. They were aware of our struggles, and we acknowledge their closeness and love at all times. Before long, Dorrit and I were fairly well stabilized and bearing children. We were also active Christians and effectively placed within the Brethren assemblies. Our church home was Bethany Gospel Hall in Tree, where we throve on the Word of God and experienced that the blessing of the Lord did make it rich, and he added no sorrow, did Proverbs 10:22. My job offered great challenges, although poorly remunerated in those days. My career as health worker commenced immediately after graduation. As if I wanted to accomplish more, I became a married man during the same year. The adventures with a better amplified in another edition of this chronicle. The opportunities offered to interact with the people in the community as a public health worker was invaluable. Health inspection was essential to deliver many of the primary health needs of veterinary services. I was privileged working along with experts from the World Health Pan American Health Organization and with other technical and social groups from other developed countries and third world nations. Later, I was to be benefited from study courses and fellowships sponsored by WHO affiliate agencies. Mom and Dad were living in a small cottage at Halseylight, as I mentioned before. It was reasonably near to our home in Red Hills and allowed for easier and more regular commuting. Martin's family and mine were in close cooperation. With the support of our migrated siblings, we were able to sustain the maintenance program of our aging parents. But time went rapidly and other changes became inevitable. Sister Chris was already well established in Stafford Hall, having many children, all of whom became prominent in their chosen vocations, serving at home and overseas. She had married Reuben Edwards before I attained my second birthday. My brother Charles made his irregular and but sorry, my brother Charles made irregular but certain appearances. He was obviously becoming older and less resentful. There was that memorable meeting. There was that memorable meeting at Ozilite when an old rift was reconciled between him and his father, Big Papa. When we did set up home in Hillview Terrace in the Redlands of St. Andrew, Dorothy and I were already becoming experienced parents, 4 children, all boys, and already being born to us. Our home was fairly convenient and became the main meeting place for members of our larger families, both Dorothy's and mine. It was quite usual for Dorothy's grandmother, Jane Stewart, to spend several weeks with us each time. Relatives coming on holidays, especially from overseas, stayed with us. Uncle Aston Sargi from Brooklyn and Aunt Enid Wollaston from Queens were no exception. New section. The boys at Calabar. My children grew up rapidly too, just as Martin's. He also won the junior scholarship at Calabar in 1978. The three boys were in the prestigious high school at one time and the same time, although soon after Fred's entry, graduation time for Lennox was in the making. Douglas left about 2 years later. The boys did claim to have discovered their identity at Ravalock. We were glad that they found their escape through the process of growth and adolescence. Lennox entered the Jamaica Civil Service and worked in the judiciary departments. Douglas embarked upon further studies in the College of Arts, Science and Technology, obtaining professional qualification in surveying and engineering. He entered the Ministry of Construction after graduation. I was also enjoying real development in my public health career. Derek was busy too with the children's upbringing, watching their timely development in education and good manners. It was not until Lennox and Douglas became working men and young Fred remained the only child at home that she found the time for her hardware industry. But confessed that, not long afterwards, she suffered from nostalgia. Freddie graduated from Calabar and went to work in the banking service before he also migrated to the United States. In New York, he joined the U.S. Air Force and served 4 years before entering Queens College in the City University of New York for undergraduate studies. Next section, ending an era. Mom and dad, after several years of quiet living and rest in their cottage in Hazlight, became inactive and frail by age and were in need of closer medical attention. Before we could properly assert ourselves to obtain the necessary nursing and geriatric care, Mama passed away suddenly in her sleep on Thursday night, April 30th, 1963. Leonis and her husband immediately took up residence in Big Papa, whose heart was very broken and was very much in need of someone to be near. After the first anniversary of Mama's passing, Dad also went home to be with the Lord and to meet dear Mama in glory. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5, A New Generation. Farming to Glory. A Jamaican Chronicle by Fred D. Townsend Sr. Farming to Glory, chapter 5. Closer related. Martin and I and our children remained very close, but we had our different responsibilities to attend. We pursued our goals in accordance with our faith in God. We had made our pledges to Him long ago, and the wives that He gave us were also Christian ladies who relentlessly exhorted their children to accept that way of life. In a spiritual way, we became even closer, for although our earthly bond have been broken, we recognize that we have become more united through the realizations of the inevitable. Dorrit and Martin's wife Mavis were very good friends. Although I became a big man, so to speak, just as Martin himself, he never refrained from his sympathetic views towards my development. He was very careful in advising me and could never restrain his outbursts of jubilation whenever I or any of my young family succeeded. He made sure that everything was going well with me and my home. I had the opportunity of visiting some of the army establishments during Martin's tenure. I was also an officer in the High Schools Army and Air Cadets Force, and frequently visited King's House, where he was in charge of security personnel. I also became a regular visitor to the Sergeant's Mess in Upper Camp, where the officers' meals delighted me. The days at Port Royal and the many trips on the ferry across Kingston Harbor were memorable events also. Dorrit and Martin's wife Mavis were very good friends Although I became a big man, so to speak, just as Martin himself, he never refrained from his sympathetic views towards my development. He was very careful in advising me I could. Oh my god. Miss, yeah. Martin became affectionately Uncle Martin after our first child was born. I'm sorry, guys. He had officiated as best man at my wedding, when perhaps I did not even know much about nuptial responsibility or the impact of for better or worse. He coached me. He supported my confidence. The Lord would see us through, he exhorted us. His prayers were not in vain. For the good Lord blessed us in our alliance. Uncle Martin's children grew up wonderfully well. There were 5 of them. The first, Dennis, attended Calabar, and after graduation, excelled to the local civil service, spending several years in London with the diplomatic corps. The second child, Jennifer, did graduate studies at the University of the West Indies, and the other 3 children all held and still holding professional careers in the country. Change of title. After a successful career in the Army, Martin entered the Correctional Services as Superintendent and Training Officer in 1972. Not long afterwards, he became Director and received public commendation for the government for meritorious service. He retired in 1982, but was retained as instructor at the Officers College in St. Anne's Bay. All during these times, I remained in my job at the Public Health Department in Kingston. I was the Deputy Chief for the corporate area in Kingston and St. Andrew. When I sought early retirement from the service, my children had started emigrating to the United States. Their mother already held resident status in that great country, which later became our permanent place of abode. Sorry. I could no longer resist temptation to travel. Just before my retirement, Dorothy and I traveled to Miami, London, and Paris. This was a final event that triggered off my interest to live overseas. On entering from Europe, I pursued very rigorously my application for retirement, which was granted with much difficulty. Martin was distraught with my plans to go. He was not in complete agreement with my reason and agreement in leaving the service. That he was affected was vividly demonstrated in his letters that followed after he finally left Jamaica. He continued in telling us that there had been no need for pulling up our roots, saying that we missed him, his family, and many other dear relatives and friends was an understatement. When we finally settled in the United States of America in 1982, Martin was really not the only sibling remaining at home. My notable brother Ivan, who had spent 20 years in Great Britain, had already returned home and become a personal officer in Kingston Transit Department. Besides, there were Charles, Sister Chris, and Leonis. My Uncle Martin had enough familial company for which I enjoyed immeasurable ease. Next section. much gratitude. We returned home frequently on vacations and enjoyed the good pleasure of renewed acquaintances with families and friends. Martin became very stout and gray-haired. He told me repeatedly that he was considering final and total retirement from the service due to old age and exhaustion. He pleaded with us to return home for good and to reap the benefits of our labor and struggles. I had been really blessed with 3 kind and loving brothers. For obvious reasons, however, this sort of biographical paper would fail to adequately extol them to the extent they deserve. To Alex and Ivan, I will remain greatly indebted for their kindness. To them, I will always remain the last little brother. My sister Ina laughed me to scorn when in an argument I mentioned that I was becoming an old man. Years failed to erase from my memory their benevolence during my school days and early adolescence. Perhaps it was the bicycle and lunch from Alex, money, clothing, and coaching received from Ivan, to say the least. In fact, they all contributed to my social and economic welfare during my growing up years. Next section. But another toll. On Monday, July 15th, 1985, I received a letter from Uncle Martin. In it, he stated, inner alia, that he finally decided to call it quits from his job. He was tired now and needed rest. Thursday night of the same week, I received a telephone call saying that Martin died suddenly in Kingston while driving home from work during the early evening. The news shocked us deeply. Dorrit and I were asleep when the phone rang. She became frozen and I was confused. The telephone fell from my shaking hands onto my pillow. I told Frank Blackwood, Ina's husband, who called me from his home in New Jersey, that I would return his call when I regained my composure. When I did return his call, Frank confirmed the very sad news, saying he had earlier received information from Kingston. I immediately called Jamaica and again received the very sad report. Ivan was calling my house all evening. I was told, but the phone kept ringing. Apparently no one was home. This attempt to unearth what may very well be some of the true treasures of our ancestry is just to expose to our generations today that those yet unborn, that our true identity had already been established. To the complacent now, and to be mediocre when the noble pace had already been set is to, using the well-known parlance, turning back the hands off the clock. Mama and Big Papa were model parents. They set all the good Christian examples for us to follow. Many of us fail to try to emulate their faithfulness and total selflessness. They were not only for us, but for everyone in the neighborhood. Daddy was always happy seeing us in church. In fact, he had seen to it that Martin, Leonis, and others played active roles in the religious programs and community festivals. Dear Mama smiled when she saw her children singing in the choir, and me in particular reciting the Last Supper. Big Papa had been very instrumental in laying the early foundation of Community Baptist Church. He told yes, sir. He told us the story many times how in 1839, Deacon Robert Edwards, Rudolph's uncle, and himself fought to raise money that actually built the church. It was an inspiring story. The Battle of the Red and White Roses. Uncle Martin named his last daughter Gertrude in honor of her loving and dear mother. Sister Chris gave her last son named Frederick in honor of Big Papa. My attempt to perpetuate the memory was to christen our last son as Fred III. Mom and Dad laid to rest in the green yard of the church they helped build. Periodically, members of the sibling group gathered around the tombs to clean them and to reminisce. Dad's mentor, Reverend M.E. Douglas Sawyers, passed on many years after him. Robert Edwards, Christinella, and Reuben, and many others of the old brigade have passed on also. Their totems are there for all to see beneath the shade of the juniper tree with its sprawling branches. Yes, sir. Above the church's spike at Canaan Mounts Gardens. Uncle Martin was there with us and saw them all lay to rest, but in July 1985, he also went home to glory. Of the blessed Savior, he always said, just one glimpse of him in glory will the toils of life repay. Redemption songs -400. This completes chapter 5 of Farming to Glory, a Jamaican family chronicle by Fred D. Townsend Sr.